Ellen! Ellen! Ellen!
Stop looking at her.
You just told me to look at her.
Ow!
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 Picture the scene, yeah? One of us, right?
On September 27, 1954, a man sat behind a desk and changed television forever. He invented the monologue, the celebrity couch, and every single thing you see on late-night TV today. His name was Steve Allen. But here's what's strange. NBC destroyed almost all his episodes. They gave credit to someone else. When he died in 2000, most people didn't even know he created The Tonight Show. What they did to him wasn't just unfair, it was calculated. And the real reason why will shock you. Steve Allen was born on December 26, 1921, in New York City. His parents were both vaudeville performers. His father, Carroll Abler, who used the stage name Billy Allen, died of a heart attack when Steve was just 18 months old. That moment changed everything. His mother, Belle Montrose, had no choice but to leave New York and move to Chicago with her baby. She leaned heavily on her Irish Catholic relatives living on the South Side. Life there was far from the lights and music of vaudeville. It was harsh, unstable, and filled with struggle. Steve never forgot the absence of his father, or the fear that came with not knowing if there would be enough money. That early loss stayed with him. It created a need in him, a hunger to prove himself, to find stability, and to make something lasting out of a life that had started with so much pain. Belle Montrose was known for her sharp wit. Even Milton Berle once called her the funniest woman in vaudeville. On stage, she made audiences laugh. Off stage, though, she was a single mother juggling two full-time jobs, raising Steve and trying to keep her career alive. The applause didn't pay the bills. To make ends meet, she toured constantly, often leaving Steve with relatives. He grew up watching his mother work tirelessly, but still struggled to provide. That contrast, public success and private hardship, shaped Steve's thinking. He learned early on that applause didn't always mean security. It planted a seed in him, one that would grow into a deep desire for both creative respect and financial safety. At 16, Steve shocked everyone. He ran away from home. He later spoke honestly about that time. He talked about learning to beg and how humiliating it felt, but also how much it taught him. He said it showed him what rock bottom looked like. Those days on the streets were painful, but they also hardened him. They gave him grit. He became determined never to feel that kind of helplessness again. The experience made him more than just resilient. It gave him empathy. He knew what it felt like to be desperate, and that feeling stayed with him even after he became successful. Despite the chaos, Steve had a gift. He could play the piano without ever being taught. He learned by ear, spending hours in his grandmother's home in Chicago, practicing over and over until the sounds matched what he imagined. By the time he was a teenager, he was playing in small clubs and making people laugh in between songs. He was doing more than performing. He was developing a style, fast, funny, clever, and musical. This mix of comedy and music became his signature. It wasn't just entertainment, it was his way out. Years later, it would help him launch one of the most influential shows in television history. But it all started in those smoky little clubs where he taught himself how to make people laugh and listen at the same time. Even his name had layers. He was born Stephen Valentine Allen, but somewhere along the way, two more names got added, Patrick and William. The reasons are still unclear. Some say it was part of his Catholic upbringing. Others think it had something to do with trying to reshape his identity after his father died. Whatever the reason, the extra names seemed to reflect who Steve was becoming, someone with many sides, many talents, and more than one role to play. Over the years, he would be known as a comedian, a writer, a musician, a thinker, and a pioneer. The changing names match the way he kept changing himself. In 1942, when Steve was just 20 years old, he made a bold choice. He dropped out of Arizona State Teachers College during his sophomore year. He wanted to follow something different. That same year, he got his first job in radio, working at KOY in Phoenix. At KOY, he did something no one else was doing. He didn't follow scripts. He talked about current events, made jokes on the spot, and played the piano live. It felt real, not rehearsed. Listeners loved it. He created a show that felt like a conversation, not a performance. By the end of the year, his show was the most popular in Phoenix. Crowds would pack into the studio just to watch him work. That energy would later become the blueprint for everything we now know as late-night television. But just as things were picking up, he got drafted into the Army during World War II. His career had to stop. It didn't last long, though. Steve had asthma, severe, disabling asthma that made him too sick for military service. He called himself a pampered, sickly beanpole and said he was too weak for sports and too asthmatic for the Army. Less than a year in, he was sent home. At the time, it must have felt like a failure, but in truth, it may have saved him. He went back to radio, now with more focus than ever. His health problems, instead of holding him back, became part of his identity. He joked about them on air. They made him relatable. In 1948, he moved to Los Angeles and joined station KNX. That's where things took off again. In Hollywood, he perfected a style that was all his own. He would play the piano, read letters from fans, crack jokes, and talk to the audience like they were old friends. He didn't plan most of it. He just made it up as he went. One night, a guest didn't show up, so Steve grabbed the mic and walked into the audience, making jokes and doing interviews on the spot. The crowd went wild. People loved that anything could happen. That moment changed everything. He kept doing it. The show got longer. More people came to watch. Soon, it was the most popular nighttime show in Los Angeles. That kind of success didn't stay off TV for long. On Christmas Day, 1950, The Steve Allen Show premiered. It aired at 11 a.m., which was unusual, but it didn't matter. The format was exactly what he had built on radio. Music, jokes, real talk, surprise guests, and audience fun. He didn't change anything, and it worked. On a quiet Monday night, September 27, 1954, a man in a simple suit sat behind a desk inside NBC's Hudson Theater. His name was Steve Allen. He looked into the camera and said, "This is tonight, and I can't think of too much to tell you about it, except I want to give you the bad news first. This program is going to go on forever." The audience laughed. No one knew he was right. Late-night television didn't exist yet. Allen was starting something with no script, no rules, and no clear future. But what he built that night would stretch across 70 years and over 12,000 episodes. That first broadcast didn't just launch a show, it launched an American ritual. Allen didn't follow a model. He created one. He brought in a desk and a couch, treating the set like a living room rather than a stage. He wasn't just a host. He was the interviewer, the comic, the ringleader. Every night, he began with something that hadn't been done before, a monologue. There was no plan for it. One night, unsure of how to begin, he talked about his day. The audience roared. That unscripted moment became a nightly tradition for every host after him, from Carson to Fallon. Allen made it personal, casual, and funny, and that simple choice changed the shape of television comedy forever. But Allen didn't stop at talking. He stepped outside the studio, walked into the street, and asked strangers bizarre questions. That segment, called Man on the Street, wasn't just a gimmick. It was groundbreaking. Most TV shows in the 1950s were stiff and stage-bound. Allen's crew broke that wall and captured real reactions. Viewers at home saw something spontaneous, unpredictable, and alive. The idea caught fire. Jay Leno turned it into jaywalking. Other shows followed. Allen had opened the door to unscripted comedy in public spaces, and that door has never closed. He also did something few dared to do in that era. He opened his stage to African-American performers. This was a time when American television was largely segregated, but Allen featured Louis Armstrong, Billie Holiday, Count Basie, and many others. He didn't ask for permission. He just believed talent mattered more than race. Sponsors complained. Executives worried. Allen kept booking them. In doing so, he quietly broke barriers and gave national exposure to artists who had long been shut out of primetime slots. His stage became more than entertainment. It became a small but powerful tool for social change. Allen's creativity never slowed. He dreamed up shows with a single theme or just one guest, turning late-night TV into something deeper. He took his show on the road before satellite broadcasting was even practical. He broadcast from different cities, bringing local culture into the national spotlight. He staged full Broadway performances late at night, making theater accessible to millions who could never see it in person. At a time when television was still a novelty, Allen treated it like a bridge, connecting Americans to music, theater, comedy, and conversation in ways no one else had imagined. And he was never afraid to be ridiculous. One night, he dunked himself in a giant vat of Jell-O. Another time, he strapped over 100 tea bags to his body, got lifted by a crane, and was dipped into hot water like a human tea bag. The audience didn't just laugh, they gasped. No one had seen anything like it. Allen's stunts were outrageous, yes, but they created a blueprint. Years later, David Letterman would jump into suits made of Velcro and Alka-Seltzer, all while echoing Allen's spirit. Do anything for a laugh. That courage to look foolish, to go too far, became became part of late night's identity. But Allen wasn't just a comic. He was a gifted musician, an accomplished jazz pianist who composed over 8,500 songs. His music was recorded by Nat King Cole, Sarah Vaughan, and Bing Crosby. On his show, he often played live. Sometimes he performed alongside legends like Art Tatum and Count Basie. In June 1955, he played a duet with Tatum that still gets talked about. He even worked with Jack Kerouac, blending poetry with jazz in raw, experimental performances. These moments weren't filler. They were genuine contributions to American culture, made on a stage built for laughs, but capable of so much more. Allen also had an eye for talent. He gave national debuts to performers who would later shape American comedy and music. He introduced Lenny Bruce when few dared to. He brought the Smothers Brothers into the spotlight. He gave Steve Martin one of his first chances. He warned viewers that Lenny Bruce might offend them, and he did it anyway. Allen didn't care about playing it safe. He cared about giving new voices a chance. That risk-taking spirit became a standard for future hosts who saw late night as more than jokes. It was a launchpad for careers. His influence on comedy sketches still echoes today. One of Allen's best-known bits was the Question Man. He'd give an answer first, then reveal the absurd question it matched. It was smart, simple, and hilarious. Johnny Carson loved it so much he turned it into his own character, Karnak the Magnificent, complete with a turban and sealed envelopes. Carson's version ran from 1964 to 1992. Even the game show Jeopardy has echoes of Allen's reversal format. And Allen? He didn't try to take credit. He once offered to pay royalties to the original writer of the sketch. That mix of generosity and brilliance made him a giant, not just in TV, but in the way he treated people. In June 1956, Steve Allen did something that seemed almost impossible. He was already hosting The Tonight Show 5 nights a week, but then he launched a brand new variety show every Sunday night called The Steve Allen Show. Both were live. Both were on national television. That meant Allen was performing live 6 nights a week, every week. No one else in television had ever tried something like that. It added up to more than 8 hours of live TV each week. And this wasn't just reading lines. It involved writing scripts, thinking up new material, performing sketches, and keeping audiences entertained night after night. Allen later admitted that the entire thing was madness. NBC didn't make things easier for him. They put his Sunday night show directly against the Ed Sullivan Show on CBS. That was one of the highest-rated shows in the country. NBC wanted Allen to take down Ed Sullivan. To do that, Allen needed a dream team. He brought in Louis Nye, Don Knotts, Tom Poston, Bill Dana, Pat Harrington Jr., Dayton Allen, Gabe Dell, and his wife Jane Meadows. The show was loud, funny, unpredictable, and full of fresh ideas, but it quickly became a fight. Every episode was a battle for ratings. It got so intense that in October 1956, both Sullivan and Allen aired tributes to James Dean on the same night. Each accused the other of stealing the idea. The rivalry wasn't just behind the scenes, it was public, and it was heated. All of this took a serious toll on Steve Allen. By the end of 1956, his health was falling apart. The stress, the schedule, the pressure, it was too much. NBC finally stepped in. They brought in comedian Ernie Kovacs to take over The Tonight Show on Monday and Tuesday nights. Allen kept doing the other nights. This was the first time a major late-night show ever split hosting duties. Kovacs had a wild, offbeat style that was completely different. But the real reason for the change was simple. Allen was exhausted. Even with the help, it was clear he couldn't keep going like this. In January 1957, he gave up The Tonight Show completely and focused only on his Sunday show. But leaving The Tonight Show wasn't his choice. NBC made that decision. They wanted him to keep fighting Ed Sullivan in prime time. They believed Allen could win that war, so they pulled him from late-night television, the very format he had created. Allen had built The Tonight Show from nothing. He turned it into a hit. He invented the basic late-night formula. A host behind a desk, comedy bits, music, celebrity guests. But NBC didn't care. They thought beating Sullivan was more important than protecting the show Allen had built. So they took him off the air at night and left him to carry Sunday nights alone. The way NBC handled the change was sloppy and cold. After Allen left, they didn't even give the job to Jack Paar right away. They tried a weird new version of The Tonight Show called Tonight, America After Dark. It bombed. Ratings dropped. Affiliates dropped the show. When Jack Paar finally took over in July 1957, NBC acted like Steve Allen had never existed. In press releases, they barely mentioned him. They didn't give him credit for the format or the success. The desk, the sketches, the interviews, all of it was treated as if Paar had invented it. Slowly, people started to forget that Allen was the one who created late-night late-night TV, NBC erased him from the story. Meanwhile, his Sunday night show kept fighting for survival. It had great talent. It had great writers. It had Allen's vision, but it couldn't beat Ed Sullivan. No matter how creative it got, Sullivan's ratings stayed on top. In 1959, NBC moved Allen's show to Monday nights. It later got picked up by ABC, but by 1961, it was canceled. That meant Allen had lost both shows. The late-night show he created was now hosted by someone else. The primetime show he gave it up for had failed. The entire sacrifice meant nothing. This wasn't just a career setback. It was the start of something deeper. NBC began slowly pushing Allen out of TV history. They gave all the credit to Jack Paar, then later to Johnny Carson. Allen's name faded from the story. By the 1980s and 1990s, people thought Carson had invented the whole late-night format. Allen still made the occasional guest appearance. Sometimes he even filled in as host, but the public didn't see him as the original anymore. NBC had reshaped the history books. Allen's legacy was fading, even though the show still followed his exact blueprint. Outside of television, Allen was a creative machine. He claimed to have written more than 8,500 songs. That's not a typo. 8,500. In 1985, the Guinness Book of Records listed him as the most prolific composer of modern times. Even legends like Irving Berlin and Paul McCartney didn't come close to that number. Allen wrote music everywhere, in the car, in the shower, sometimes in his sleep. In 1950, he made a bet with singer Frankie Lane that he could write 50 songs a day for a week. He set up a table in the window of a music store and did it. He wrote 350 songs in 7 days. One of them, Let's Go to Church Next Sunday Morning, reached number 13 on the pop charts and number 2 on the country charts. He also wrote Gravy Waltz, which won a Grammy for Best Original Jazz Composition in 1964, and This Could Be the Start of Something Big, which was recorded by Aretha Franklin and Count Basie. Despite only having 3 years of piano lessons as a kid, Allen made over 75 albums. In one crazy event, he reportedly wrote 400 songs in one day while staying at a Michigan hotel. He wasn't just a musician either. He wrote more than 50 books. They weren't ghost-written or vanity projects. These were real books: murder mysteries, children's stories, social commentary, and personal essays. His 1989 book, Dump, talked about how Americans were losing their ability to think critically. Another book, Steve Allen on the Bible, Religion and Morality, tackled religion head-on. He also wrote fiction, including titles like Murder on the Glitter Box, Wake Up to Murder, and The Man Who Turned Back the Clock. For kids, he wrote playful stories like The Bug and the Slug in the Rug, and Princess Snip Snip and the Puppy Kittens. He published through big-name publishers. His books sold well, and they showed the same sharp thinking that made him stand out on TV. From 1977 to 1981, he returned to television with one of his boldest ideas ever, a PBS series called Meeting of Minds. The show brought actors together to play historical figures like Plato, Cleopatra, Thomas Jefferson, Karl Marx, and Florence Nightingale. They sat around a table and discussed philosophy, politics, and religion. The scripts were based on real writings. The goal was to make it feel like an honest conversation between great minds from different centuries. Allen had pitched the idea in the 1950s, but no network wanted it. He finally made it happen himself, often paying for it out of his own pocket. The show ran for 4 seasons, won a Peabody Award and an Emmy, and became a hit with educators. Allen's wife, Jane Meadows, played multiple roles, including Cleopatra. He later published the scripts and gave them away for free to schools and theaters. He believed smart ideas should be shared. Steve Allen's life looked like a highlight reel on the outside, but behind the applause, the talk shows, and the sharp suits was a man constantly pulled apart by ambition, heartbreak, and regret. He married Dorothy Goodman in 1943, right in the middle of World War II. They had 3 sons, Steve Jr., Brian, and David. At the same time, Steve's career was catching fire. He was making $900 a week and filling in for stars like Eve Arden. But while he was out chasing stardom, Dorothy was home alone, raising their kids with little help. The more famous he got, the more distant he became. Dorothy wasn't part of the glamorous world Steve was entering, and that gap just kept growing. He started comparing her to the women at his parties and hated himself for it. He even turned to drinking for relief, but only felt worse. By 1952, the marriage collapsed. Steve moved to New York and filed for divorce. Raised Catholic, he later said the breakup shattered him. It made him question everything, including his faith. They both remarried later, but that wound left a scar that never quite healed. 2 years after the divorce, he married Jane Meadows. That marriage lasted all all the way to his death in 2000. On the surface, it looked like a dream pairing. She was an Emmy-winning actress and Broadway star. He was inventing the late-night TV format, but it wasn't all smooth. He once told Jane he'd divorce her if she didn't play Cleopatra in his TV show Meeting of Minds. It was dramatic, yes, but that was their energy. They were intense, opinionated, and deeply connected. They challenged each other constantly, but they also shared everything: art, politics, parenting, and poetry. They didn't spend more than a month apart in nearly 50 years. Their home was always buzzing with jokes, arguments, and creative ideas. It worked because both of them respected the fire in the other. But for all of Steve's success, his relationship with his kids was strained. He loved them, and he wanted them to be curious and free-thinking, but he was barely home. During his first marriage, Dorothy carried the weight alone. Steve's long absences didn't just hurt his wife, they left his kids feeling neglected. Even during his second marriage, his perfectionism made things difficult. His son, Brian, especially, took a path that broke Steve's heart. In the 1970s, Brian joined a cult in Seattle called the Love Family and lived under the name Logic Israel. Steve didn't know what to make of it. He blamed himself. Maybe he was too much. Maybe his larger-than-life personality and emotional distance had pushed Brian away. He poured that pain into a book called Beloved Son, Wrestling with Guilt and Failure. In time, Brian left the cult, and they slowly rebuilt their bond. But the regret stayed with Steve. He knew what he had missed. Part of the reason Steve was never fully present was because he was always battling something most people never saw: his asthma. It had cut his military service short during World War II. He was drafted in 1943, but discharged right away because of his breathing problems. That left him feeling weak, especially in a time when manhood was measured by war service. He couldn't prove himself with strength, so he turned to ideas: music, comedy, books. He chased achievement with a kind of desperation. Over his life, he wrote more than 50 books and over 8,500 songs. Asthma limited him physically, but it lit a fire inside him that never went out. Even into his 70s, he worked non-stop. He once said he felt more alive then than he had in years. That drive came from somewhere deep, rooted in pain and fueled by the need to matter. And yet, near the end, Steve felt erased, forgotten. He had created The Tonight Show in 1954, laying down the exact format every late-night host still uses. The monologue, the sketches, the celebrity chats, that was all Steve. But as the decades rolled on, the credit didn't stick. Johnny Carson, Jay Leno, and others got the glory. Steve's name was often left out, even in NBC's own promotional material. When Jimmy Fallon took over in 2014, the network described the show's history as belonging to 5 men, barely acknowledging that Steve had invented the entire thing. It wasn't just oversight, it was personal. Steve saw his legacy shrinking while the industry he helped build moved on without him. The worst blow came when he found out that NBC had destroyed almost all of his original Tonight Show episodes. From 1954 to 1957, he'd hosted hundreds of hours of groundbreaking TV. But in the 1950s and 60s, networks often erased tapes to save money or reused them to record new content. Nearly all of Steve's work was gone. Only about 30 episodes survived, kept not out of care, but for legal reasons. Even his own estate didn't have the full collection. It was a devastating loss. That show had been a mix of comedy, music, and serious conversations on everything from civil rights to addiction. Now, it was mostly memories and a few scattered reels. The destruction made it easier for others to forget his role. Without the tapes, people couldn't see what he had built. The silence around his contribution grew louder. When he died on October 30th, 2000, it happened the same way he lived, quietly and unexpectedly. That day, he was driving to his son's house in Encino when an SUV backed into his car. It didn't seem like a big deal. They exchanged information and moved on. But Steve had unknowingly suffered internal injuries. A blood vessel ruptured in his chest, slowly leaking blood into the sac around his heart. The condition, hemopericardium, is silent but deadly. Steve felt a bit tired, went inside, laid down, and never woke up. He was 78. At first, people thought it was just a heart attack, but the coroner's report revealed the truth. His death was caused by injuries from that minor accident. He didn't even tell his wife or son what had happened. It was one of those strange, tragic twists where everything looks fine until it's not. And when the news broke, it barely made a ripple. The man who built late-night TV, who wrote thousands of songs, who redefined what a TV host could be, was gone, and most people didn't notice. His death was a footnote passed over in silence. It was as if the final chapter of his life mirrored the slow slow disappearance of his legacy. Not with scandal, not with rage, but with the quiet heartbreak of being forgotten.